automatically use the git config for which app you have. So if you have more than one, you have to specify. Unless there's a flag you can set.
So right here you have a database URL. So this just contains that application. So your application is always going to use this one. You're going to read from that. So you can push the same code somewhere else, and then it's using a different database based on that.
But you can use this database anywhere. I mean, you could attach it to other applications if you wanted to. It's just you just set that config. You want to show setting config? We never showed that. Could do that.
Oh yes. So in the same way, you can set various things. So I can say Heroku config debug equals true. And if I wanted somewhere in my application, I could read this. So I could flip debug on and off on the correct application.
And those are available to your application just as environment variables like the rest of the database configuration.
And if you notice, actually, as soon as it adds that, it's restarting the application. So anytime you deploy new code, we're gonna wait for that to build, or when you change a config bar. And when we did rollback, it would actually roll back all of these variables as well. So it's not just rolling back code, it's rolling back to this point in time where your environment is exactly what you specified.
So if you look at the releases right now, it would show this as a new release. You could roll back if it broke something. You can do git config. Yeah, so version 9 there is new. This going to change that. So if you did a rollback, the debug would be off. Or you could just remove it manually, of course.
Yeah. So you can set anything in your config there and remove it.
And for us, the reason we have this methodology that we use called 12-factor, which is available at 12factor.net. And the big thing that we push is that your code should be the same no matter where you deploy it. So a lot of systems, they'll want you to, you'll have a different settings file for your Django application, depending on where you're deploying it.
Yeah.
And so for us, we say that code should never change, no matter where it is. So the environment variables are a mechanism for that.
So this is in part going to prevent those errors of deploying debug or dev code to production, but it's also going to give you reproducible results every single time, which helps for things like CI and continuous deployment.
One of the biggest benefits of using Heroku is, in addition to just being a productivity enhancement, and you don't have to worry about servers anymore, we also make it so that you can. What was I going to say? I don't know. In addition to. Oh, go ahead.
Are there any auto-scaling capabilities there? If people start coming, I guess Flash.it.
We have an API that you pretty much has a very application-specific problem. So we have an API available so you can scale it, but you have to do the monitoring yourself. And we have some cool tools for that other people have done.
Sure, but how do I measure? Do have metrics for load?
So there's a couple different tools within our add-ons catalog. So New Relic is one that'll monitor essentially your entire request time, where your application spends time, how much time is spent in the database, and memcache, and all those sort of things. Right. For us, we don't have something for auto-scaling out of the box, because it's actually a hard problem to solve really, really well. And when we do it, we want to do it the right way, right. Which means if you need to auto-scale your database, we want to be able to do that for you. And if you need to auto-scale memcache, we want to be able to do that for you. If you need to auto-scale just your web processes receiving traffic, we want to be able to do that for you. So a lot of the tools today are available to auto-scale web processes, and it'll take more traffic. But if you've got an issue with database lock contention, it's not going to help you. So we have some of our users that are very, very happy. I know HireFire app is a big one for the Ruby community. And I think there's some that maybe support some Java as well. But in general, it's a hard problem to solve well. It's something we've thought about and looked at, and every time we've tried it, we haven't felt happy with the solution. We'd rather release the right solution than just release a solution.
If you're using something like App Engine, sometimes you'll magically get a bill that's a couple $1,000s that you didn't expect to. So it's if you were to enable something like that, you should be careful.
Yeah, you probably will try some kind of threshold.
Yeah. Hopefully. So when you're deploying to Heroku, in addition to being, this productivity tool, also what we are is we're really a scaling platform, and we kind of introduce some constraints onto your application that kind of enforce scaling best practices. For example, if you're building a web application that has, and say it's running on 4 servers, if you're relying really heavily on local disk persistence, it can come into a lot of problems. So like a lot of PHP frameworks will do this. We'll like write certain things to the disk and expect them to be there. Or like a user uploads a file and they'll store it just to the disk. So when you're running on Heroku, we give you write access to the system, but every time one of these processes restarts, and we automatically restart them at least once every 24 hours, all those changes go away. So that allows you, that's a nice constraint that it kind of forces you to build applications that are scalable. So usually if a user is to upload a file, you would push it to S3 and use database for actual persistence.
So why do you restart everything at least once a day?
So Heroku could...
So Java can handle it with memory issues? I kid. Actually, most of the languages are pretty happy about that once they start having memory issues. But it's actually just to kind of clean the slate. It's to force that ephemeralization.
When you're running on EC2, because we run on EC2, there's boxes can disappear if you're running your own infrastructure and all these kind of crazy things, and we abstract all that away. So if you assume that your process is going to restart at least once every 24 hours, if we were to move it to another system, I think that's just an expected side effect.
At one point, we fully prevented writing to the file system at all because it's not a great thing to do. There's cases where it's, let's write a file to the system, do something with it for a few seconds, and then actually persist it where we want to, which we're a little more okay with, although you should expect that file to disappear on you at any point in time because it may. And in a scalable solution, that's typically what you have happen. So you're looking at persisting things outside in a central SAN or something like S3 or CDN where it can scale.
And we also limit an incoming connection to 30 seconds, so you don't have any people aren't clogging all of your sockets essentially. And that's most of the constraints we put on your application, right?
So how do I write something to S3, for example? Do they have an environment variable that gives me an S3 URL?
You would probably
so I would say Heroku config add my S3 bucket. So I put my bucket name, my secret key in there, and essentially use that. And I would have one for dev and I would have one for production. So they're different buckets.
And you'd use a library to upload those to S3. Yeah, so for Python there's Boto, Paperclip for Rails, one of the good ones. And it's really simple.
Which places do you load balance, and to what extent is that a black box?
Incoming HTTP requests are the only things that are load balanced.
Yes.
So if you're running non-HTTP processes, they just run.
And it's
largely... You have no say over the load balancing. You can't define sticky stuff. It will go to any of...
Yes, it's completely stateless. And I believe, is it random, or do we do some kind of round robin?
No, we check to see which one's available to accept traffic. But you can't do, I assume you're a Java developer then, with sticky sessions?
That's yeah.
Sticky sections are a common thing for Java developers.
They're terrible.
Some of our Java team has created some kind of replacements for it. I believe using Redis and something else, but you're essentially looking at that point a centralized session store. Most other web frameworks are going that way. They've been that point for a little while. Some of the newer Java ones are. I know the Play framework, which is a little more lightweight. I believe it uses external session store. So in short, it doesn't work, but it also doesn't scale at a real large scale.
How about health checks on the part of the load balancer? Usually the load balancer would need some kind of method to determine whether an instance is healthy. Do you have something like that?
Not necessarily.
As long as your application is accepting incoming requests for HTTP, it will assume that it's healthy.
Okay.
So sometimes it'll crash, it'll automatically restart if it crashes. Okay. And if it's still running and it's not accepting requests at all, like it's just not even binding to the socket anymore, it will, I think after 20 seconds or something, it'll assume that it's not okay and it'll start moving to another
So within the router, you can see things like, here's an app crashed. In this case, if I grab the other application, I would see, the incoming requests.
So this is really useful too for things that aren't necessarily HTTP, they're not web services. If you can have something that like goes and scripts a bunch of websites, and sticks it somewhere and do all kinds of fun stuff, and it just, have it scale out automatically. Do some really powerful things.
How are you killing off the different processes if you restart them? Are you
We
sort of
let them
listening?
finish the request.
Okay.
So we essentially let them finish the request, and then we issue a
SIG term. And then I think after 20 seconds or 10, we use 10 SIG kill.
Okay.
And then if they're still running, we just kill.
So the goal is to actually kill them off as cleanly as possible. So we give them time to finish. So at that point, you could have multiple processes running, some of your old code, new code, but your old code is just finishing that request it already had.
And we're not limiting you either in what you can run essentially. Like we don't care about threads or sub processes. Your entry point in your proc file could just be a bash script that runs 20 different processes. So we send that SIG term to all of the sub processes as well.
Is it possible to do deployments without downtime?
Talk to me afterwards.
There is no downtime now. So it was I think a single second that it won't respond to a request, but it'll hold the request while it's being deployed.
So right now, currently, what it'll do is it'll hold the request and basically queue those up while it's booting the new one, and then when your application is up, it'll receive that traffic. And it varies based on your application boot time, really. So some things boot up very fast, some things boot up a little slower. Of course, the bigger your app, the slower it boots. We've looked into some zero downtime deploys, and we've got some features we're working with and evaluating and testing out with users. So if you're already on us and really curious to try it, we can chat afterwards.
It's extremely close. Yeah, it's just the amount of time it takes to download your application from S3, essentially. So if you're a big Java application, it can be 2 seconds.
So I saw before you guys accelerating that from Python.
Yep.
So do you use Rabbit MQ as a backend or something else?
You can use whatever you want, but we have a great Rabbit AMPQ add-on, and there's also Redis you can use. I personally use Amazon SQS. Works pretty well. Yeah.
So we actually have RabbitMQ, which is run by VMware, who maintains it, and we have a AMPQ. Redis works pretty well. It's take your pick.
You can use Postgres as well.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome.
This is a really tough question to answer probably, but at what scale, because EC2 can already be quite expensive, at what scale does Heroku become ridiculously expensive? Where you just have to say, we're at such a scale, we can just hire people to build a tailored specific solution?
That depends. Different people are going to have different opinions. We had people actually, one of my favorite ones, because it's a site I enjoy reading occasionally, Urban Dictionary, actually moved off of managed hosting onto us. And it's actually a single guy that runs the entire site. So for him, he actually loved his hosting company. He loved the guys. He had a good relationship with them, but for him, it was a better use of his time and actually more economical to just be on us.
That's just the perfect example that I can see where Heroku works really well, because what can you do as one guy?
Sure.
In
the same vein, we've got very large...
It's not even time savings either. It's like, we make decisions for you that are, on our end, very economical. So you can save a lot of money by working on us. But it really depends on your application.
So, like Miley Cyrus, I suspect it's managed by an agency that does a lot of these things. And for them, it was... I'm not sure I'm happy about that site.
So people ask if we can handle their website. I think if you can handle Miley Cyrus, we can handle them.
But in general, we've had some very large customers group me as a group text messaging service they could easily have their own ops team. And it's where your priorities. What is your core business focus? Is it running ops, or is it building features?
You can save a lot of money on us too, because you don't have to run redundant services. So if you're running on EC2, usually you want a completely replicated version of your system ready to go in case the load balancer fails. And since we abstract all that away, you can save a lot in that respect.
So it depends. It's all your personal preference. If you want to hire and grow an ops team, we do have some people leave, but then we have some people that start using less of their ops team and more of us.
It's been the 2 years to build the infrastructure to handle failover.
Of what I've seen so far, it doesn't seem like there's much vendor lock-in. Are there a few things that you can think of that if one were to build a system on this and at some point you just decide to run your own ops team, at which places would we be locked in?
In no place at all, except for your time.
That's actually a large part of our goal. Our goal is not to lock you in any way. This code can run locally, it would take me a few minutes to set up an Amazon server. Setting up replication and load balancing and all that, of course, a little bit more. And our goal isn't to lock you in. Our goal is, we like to think of it as a managed service, as we carry the pager. So when things go down at 2 a.m., because they inevitably do, we're going to get the call in, not you. We're going to wake up, we're going to fix the problem. At least on the server level, if you break your application at 2 a.m., it's your code that you broke. But, so we're not much up there. But if it's, servers breaking, that kind of thing, we're taking on that responsibility. So our goal is to keep you up and running. Does that help answer a little bit?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Will you get into the European hosted?
Yeah, I'll come back to it. Okay. So I'm actually curious, how many people actually have users that are primarily local and you want it here for latency, or is it due to legal issues?
Both.
Of hosting the data outside of, okay.
Both, yeah.
So there is no strict timeline for us to be in Europe data centers. I'd be really curious if people are interested in the database service, talk to me afterwards. It's a separate, we run our own Heroku Postgres that does extra things. It streams the write-ahead logs from Postgres to S3, so it's very, very durable. If you ripped out a disk and threw it in the ocean, you wouldn't lose data. So on that front, we essentially have to build up the layers of, we've got to support all the underlying services. Then we've actually got to talk, because we don't actually just want to be in Europe data centers. I know most of you might be pretty happy with that. For us, we want to be able to fail over between the two if possible. We want it to be a very multi-tenant and robust solution. So for us, we've looked at it and we've come back to it a few times. I can't say definitively, but I expect we're safe harbor compliant, which helps with the legal regulations first, and then at that point, probably, at some point we will run on European data centers. There's no timeline right now, though, unfortunately.
Latency here is actually pretty impressive compared to other places in Europe that I've been. Switzerland's pretty great.
Yeah, it's actually not too bad. No, it's, I mean, for websites, definitely not. The interactive terminals are those, so.
Yeah, but you don't use those too often.
I do.
I know we're not safe harbor compliant at the moment, but it's in the roadmap.
Can you expand on this a little bit? I'm not familiar with the safe harbor domains.
So essentially,
So safe harbor is for an agreement between the EU and the US that essentially, even though the machines would be in the US, they're more or less legally EU machines. So they're not compliant to any of the crazy US laws where we can go in and look at your data and that kind of thing. So for most of the legal cases where a lot of European countries require the data to be in the country or in the EU, that actually complies with that. So it's specific machines that it would be running on that are kind of guaranteed that they're safe harbor. It doesn't help with the latency, but it actually does get around a lot of the legal issues around European countries having their data outside of that country.
Amazon had a huge downtime last year, I think November or so.
April?
April, okay.
Yep.
I
forgot.
Yeah. Heroku was down as well.
Yep.
Is something like that going to happen as well in the future, or is there already something in place that would prevent something like this?
We're doing a lot of things. We're working on, we still recall it very, very vividly. Some of our services were backed up before others. And that's to us really like why being in a Europe data center, why being in not just US East but US West and that kind of thing across data centers really matters. So it's something we're working on. We have made some improvements since then, so it's much less likely to happen. Can't guarantee that all of Amazon won't go down because it's Amazon and who knows usually. But it is something we're working on, and for us, uptime, trust, availability is our top priority, hands down across the company. So
If the
being
downtime
across
is
data,
because it's Amazon, we take full responsibility.
What about the different dependencies you might have with your application? Okay, you might mention you run Python, Java, and so on. I mean, what versions of these platforms do you support? I mean, there are these specific.
So internally, we use a thing called build packs, and what they are is essentially a shim between Heroku and your application, and they allow you to. We have them all open source. And you can build your own. And they're actually what we use internally to support a language. So if you wanted to use something else that isn't either supported by us or you wanted to make some changes to what happens during the deploy, you can take a build pack and do whatever you want.
so you can actually see how the Java one works right here, and actually the exact commands that are run when you deploy. For Java, I believe we run JDK 1.6 or 6.
I have no idea.
You can essentially connect each type in C.
Ruby right now you can specify multiple versions in your gem file, and then soon in Python right now it's 2.7.2, and in the future you'll be able to specify which version of Python as well.
So in general, the day there's a new release, we may or may not be on it, but we try to support the more recent versions pretty regularly. And if there's a particular one, feel free to ask, and we can see where it is on the roadmap.
In Node.js as well, I think you can specify any version, and it'll get it on that.
And is that installed on that particular machine then, or is it so that you can have any combination of things, or?
Yeah, so
do you use some system with images, so to say, that you?
Essentially, you can take the build pack, and then everything that does is applied to all the instances of your application. And we have a really interesting build pack called a multi-build pack, and it allows you to compose them together. So you just have a file where you specify you want to use the Node one, and the Python one, and the Ruby one, and then it'll use them all at the same time. Which is really interesting. And we're exploring making that more official. But if you Google like Heroku build pack multi, you'll you can use that. Yeah.
Do you support different Ruby implementations?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can specify. I think in your gem file, Rubinius or IRB.
I think Rubinius works, yeah.
It does, yeah. Terrence launched that last month, so you can specify any major version and it'll work without having to do a build pack or anything.
What about PyPy?
Nah, well, so someone built a PyPy build pack, but not officially yet.
So with build packs, you can actually have,
I think it was Mike Cheekas. Yeah.
so right here, so actually to use a custom build pack, you can create one yourself. People have created one for WordPress, for Go, for Erlang. But essentially you create it with this build pack URL. And then it'll use whatever your custom instructions are for your application. So in this case, PyPy works fine. And then it's just a config bar in your application that you can remove later.
I'm really excited to add that officially. Pretty awesome. It's a big goal of mine.
I have a question regarding the resource allocation. So, assuming you have something called Heroku, and you already know that very shortly it will allocate at least 4 GB of memory. Okay. How do you do this in Heroku?
Currently, every dyno is running with 512 megabytes per hour.
Okay.
So I think we're exploring options to make that,
Yeah, we'd love to hear the use case in a little bit more detail. We've heard some interesting ones that make some sense. And the question is kind of how many of those are there? Which ones make sense for us right now? Obviously, we're very strong on websites and web presence and that kind of thing. So things like, depending on the language, Java and Python are very common for types of heavy data crunching.
Yeah.
For some machine learning for NLP and other things that require a good bit more of that. So if that's kind of, if the use case is in that bucket, we'd love to hear more about it, or if it's outside of that.
And another question I have is like, how about say a Python worker that requires NumPy or SciPy? Like, how's that?
NumPy you can install fine. SciPy needs a lot of really odd dependencies, like the Fortran compiler, things like that. So someone made a build pack that has SciPy available.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would declare this service requires NumPy.
You would say, so in your requirements.txt file, you just put NumPy, and it will just install it with all the rest of the dependencies, like Django or whatever else you need.
How about like any other Python modules? Same thing, or?
Yes, every Python module. If you just use the, do you have the requirements.txt there? This file you specify. So pip, do you use pip? Yeah, so if you run pip freeze, this is what it sticks out. And if you do pip install -r, it'll take a file like this and it'll install all of them. And that's what we run.
So, okay, anything that pip can install, you can press
yes. So things like SciPy need some really heavy system dependencies. And that's, right now you need to do a custom build pack. But, yeah.
NumPy can take forever.
Okay, a couple minutes. Yes.
Are there any differences in practice between user-contributed build packs and the official ones?
The only difference is, the official ones automatically, like we try to detect. The user-created ones, we're not going to try them obviously by default. Yeah. So you have to kind of opt into them, but that's the only difference between them.
Okay.
And you can actually use build packs on other platforms now too. Like Cloud Foundry or Staccato supports them, and a couple other people are adopting them as well, which is really cool. So ideally, we want to make it so they're not specific to Heroku right now. So we want to make it so it's just an open standard.
Are there any special configurations with logging? Is it possible to just log at will and have a look at it with SSH or what do you do?
To just log what?
Logging.
So all of your logging, you're just going to pipe to standard out. Heroku is going to aggregate all of that from the router, all of your worker processes, all of your web processes, your database, everything. And then from there you can do...
you can record standard error as well, right?
Yes, standard out and standard error.
And of course you can do custom things. Like we have a couple of logging add-ons. You can
so
send data to a service if you want.
Yeah, so you can see them on Heroku. So in this case, I can just tell all of the, actually just view the logs for this application of what I have. And then they're right there. From there, you could add, like Kenneth was saying, you could add an add-on, which will automatically just consume those logs. So you can persist them, chart them. There's a variety of them. Loggly is one that does some pretty charting.
Where do they end up then in S3? Where do the logs end up? Do they end up in S3 in that case?
So for Heroku, we treat them as streams. So they're not like forever persisted. I think by default we give you a couple hour window or a couple days.
5,000 lines
yeah.
By default. So it depends on your application. For some applications, that's less than a second. For others, that can be a few days. So in that case, you would want to add an add-on, which basically consumes all of those logs. So if we look at Loggly, you can actually see they'll keep up to 25 megabytes a day with 1 day retention up for free. You can go up to 8 gigabytes a day with 30-day retention for them.
So Loggly now is the way that Heroku works with logs and can read those and store them and you retrieve them over.
There's also an open API that you can actually just stream them and do whatever you want with. And I have a Python module that I wrote that you can use to just, it returns a generator, and then as they come through, you can just shuffle them away wherever you want.
Yeah, like an HTTP API.
Exactly, yes.
There was one that was another one that was very good. Oh, Paper Trail. Paper Trail is one that a lot of us really like internally. It's actually not too exciting looking. It just takes your logs, and then it's essentially a really efficient grep. There's no fancy charting, nothing else. You can just search and it returns fast. For about as much data as you could probably handle in your log.
This is using that same API that any user can use as well.
How about PostGIS for the postal database? Is that supported?
Yes. Yes with a caveat, but yes. It depends on the exact version of the database you provision. It's not available on our low-level development database, but on the production ones, it's available there.
Are you using Postgres 9.1 or?
I have to check, because I know I don't know, we don't have the latest compiled yet,
Right.
but it'll be around the corner.